welcome to today's AUC People, and I'm delighted to be joined by two wonderful musicians, but also wonderful people, Dr. Bridget RennieSalonen and Willem Luitingh. Welcome, Bridget and Willem.
Thanks
for having you with us today.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to hear more about your particular journeys, both musically and as people, and how you came to be part of IUC, and I think it's going to be fascinating. So maybe Bridget, will start with you. So many of you would have heard Bridget perform. She has a long history as arguably Cape Town's finest flautist, and formerly a member of the CPO and performed all over Cape Town for many years. But here at IUC has been involved for, I think, about 8 years now. So, Bridget, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, where you grew up, your family. Are you a native Cape Townian? Take us back to the start.
I am, yes. I was born in town in Gardens. I grew up in Gardens. I was actually born out here in Highlands, in what's now Vincent Pilati. In those days it was St. Joseph's, I think. I grew up in Cape Town. Went to school in Cape Town, university in Cape Town, and my mum's a musician. I'm the eldest of 4. Most of my mum's lineage of family were also all musicians, mostly string players. So I was told, well, you're not going to be a string player, you need to be a wind player. So take your pick, flute or clarinet. And I just chose flute.
And at what age were you when you had to make that choice?
Look, I think I was about 11 or so, but before that I played recorder since about the age of 4 or 5. I remember I loved the recorder. I still have such fond childhood memories of all my recorder adventures and misadventures, and all my lovely little books. In those days it wasn't photocopying, but it was lovely hand-drawn little books with pictures and all kinds of things that we did as children learning music. So it's all very, like I said, fond memories.
So it wasn't something imposed on you. You grew up in a very musical family. I mean, were all your siblings playing music as well?
Yes, it was just part of our lives. Part of our lives. Our mum used to have chamber music groups playing once or twice a week at home in the evenings. And I remember we'd be sent off to bed and they'd be playing string quartets or piano trios or something. My mum's a viola player. My dad's an amateur violinist, even though he's actually an architect. His main passion, though, he stopped playing the violin pretty much, but that's how my parents actually met, was in the UCT University Orchestra while he was studying architecture. And my mum was there, and they met in the orchestra. But my dad's actually so incredibly musical, and I'm very proud of him actually as a singer, because he's sung in numerous choirs his whole life, all the way from his childhood in Grahamstown, actually in the Grahamstown Cathedral, where he was a chorister for many, many years, and also head chorister of Grahamstown Cathedral. And then throughout his life he's been a wonderful singer. He currently sings in Vox, the chamber choir, and he's a stalwart member of Vox, and with John Woodland conducting, which I'm sure of many of our congregation also know Vox. I'm sure you've heard Vox's lovely performances. So my dad's turning 80 in a month's time, and he's still singing, and just a wonderful musician as well. And what's interesting to me is how somebody like my dad can be a creative, an architect, a heritage architect, and that's his speciality. But actually, I think we as children inherited musical genes from my mum and my dad, actually. That's the point I'm trying to make. He really is also a musician.
And so you pursued music through school? I mean, did you have a sense that you wanted to make music a career, or were there other things?
No, actually, because my mum being a musician and her parents having been musicians, they warned us. They said, it's not the ideal profession. Be careful. And so we were steered skillfully in other directions. That's another whole long story, and I don't want this to be all about me. I'd love to hear some more about Willem, but suffice to say that my undergraduate studies were actually a more general BA degree, in which I did psychology, history of art, some music subjects, licentiate in music through the Royal Schools, and so on. So I made sure that in my undergraduate studies I actually did a very broad what would be in the United States called a liberal arts degree, I suppose, but with enough practical music and theoretical music to qualify me also as a musician in the undergraduate higher education level.
Where did you study?
University of Cape Town. And so I was performing a lot. I was playing the youth orchestra and doing all the things that young kids in music do. So in fact, most of my friends kind of thought I was studying at the College of Music full-time, but I was in and out of the College of Music. I was also on the upper campus doing psychology and so on.
Okay.
Which is interesting to me now, because now in much later years I came back to doing a PhD, and my field is performing arts health and musicians' health, and then the psychology actually came back in again.
Like
so it's almost like a full circle coming back to where my interests are, which is bringing those kinds of multidisciplinary, or that kind of multidisciplinary approach, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to that a little bit later, Bridget. And Willem, and just to introduce Willem, I mean, most of you have seen Willem he's been our organist and pianist for about 4 years now, Willem. And I must say, as a musician myself, having worked with Willem, it's been an absolute pleasure having you as part of the church. So talented and easy to work with, and but very shy and retiring. I had to twist Willem's arm to be sitting in this chair today, and much more comfortable making music behind the piano and the organ. But it'd be very interesting just to get to know you a little bit better, Willem. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up and where you're from originally?
Well, I was born in a little town called Middelburg in the so-called Eastern Transvaal those days. It's now called Mpumalanga. And it was a beautiful town with beautiful buildings and churches and all that, and wonderful schools. And my grandfather, from my father's side, he was born from a Dutch family. They came all the way from Harderwijk, from the Netherlands. So my father is the second generation boy, and he was born here in South Africa. So they all settled there in Middelburg, Transvaal. Had a wonderful upbringing, full of music. My mum was a very fine pianist and accompanist. So, and my father was, both were arts teachers. So, there was a lot of art in the house.
Arts as in
arts,
drawing,
arts and music. You all did music. Some sort of instrument, mainly keyboard instruments. So after school, I went to the University of Pretoria, where I worked with wonderful musicians. And I worked with Professor Willems. He studied under Marie-Claire in France. So I always said I'm her grandson, in that regard. But I felt like a grandson of Marie-Claire, and I also met her and had wonderful times with her. So after that...
Well, can I just interrupt you there? Can I just take you back a little bit though? I want to hear about the journey to get to the University of Pretoria. So growing up in your family in Middelburg, did you have siblings? How many of you?
Yes, I'm one of a twin.
Are you a twin?
Yes, I'm a twin.
Okay.
I'm not a twin, I'm one of a twin. He is in England. He's married and have a good life there. And my older brother, he's in Canada. He's residing in Vancouver.
Okay.
He's a lawyer. But we all did music and arts. So, but of course, I was the one took it further.
And so, you grew up in Middelburg. Were you in Middelburg all through your schooling before you went to Pretoria?
Yes. I took lessons at a very young age. I took lessons with my father's sister, who has been a very fine local organist. I started very early. I was always very fond of the instrument because of the fact that it could play so loud and also so very soft, so soft that you can't even hear it. So I was very intrigued by the instrument. So
growing up, you learned the piano or the organ or both?
Both.
Right.
It was always the same level. I tried to keep it at the same level. Also at university, I tried to keep it at the same level.
Is that unusual for someone very young to be learning organ? From my own musical background, a lot of people learn piano, but I found it's more rare for young people to decide they want to learn to play an organ, and it's quite a different skill using your pedals and no sustain and things. So you've got a very good finger technique. I mean,
well, I was very privileged to have somebody in the family to teach me after my father's death. So that was kind of something to that was contact with my father, because I worked with my father's sister. And it was just absolutely wonderful to play the organ and I was organist at various churches from very young age.
Right.
Very young age. So I had to sight read from very young. So
that's very interesting, because I think that's just one of the most valuable skills that any musician can have, actually, is sight reading.
Forced to.
Well, I've always been amazed at your ability to do that. So I'm a brass musician, and I can read one note. I also play piano, but I used to struggle when I go, because all of a sudden I'm reading 7 notes and I've got to make my fingers and hands all working together. Whereas when you're playing just and you're as a flautist.
I have the same problem. So I did do piano in primary school, and even now I'm just so fearful of being thrown at the keyboard, because I can play one line, but putting it all together for a single line instrument player is another skill set completely.
No, and I'm always using more, but then when you've got to have different finger technique and using your feet to play the bass.
Could you reach the pedals?
Well, I was thinking, as a child learning the organ, I mean, you don't have an organ in your house. Did you have an organ at home to practice on? I mean,
I have one, yes.
You had one growing up, though?
No.
So when you were learning the organ, did you have to go to church to practice?
Yes, it's actually better, because you are then forced. It's like going to the gym.
Willem must have been very tall then to be able to reach the pedals in a big church organ. Because a lot of children, I think, they want to play the organ, but they can't yet actually reach everything. Am I right?
Yeah.
And Willem, growing up, did you have a sense that you wanted to make music a career? Was that?
Actually, I was taught by teachers that is my, I was taught that is my forte. But I always wanted to do something else as well. But I tried to enroll for a dental technology course. But it didn't work out because of quotas and that sort of thing. So I went straight into teaching after studying.
So when you left school, you went to the University of Pretoria was it a music degree or an arts degree you did there?
Music BMAS, and
right.
And then I went to teach various schools, also in Johannesburg, National School of Arts and that sort of thing. And then after a while, I was hijacked. And that was a turning point in my life, because I thought myself, maybe I should go into teaching in other areas of the country. So at that stage, I was feeling I need to do something else. So out of the blue, I got a call from the Drakensberg Boys Choir School, Bunny Ashley Botha, very famous choir director, and he said to me, listen, don't you feel like coming to the Central Berg, having a ball with us? We invite you to be our accompanist. I said, that is just something from heaven. So I went there. I was I've been there for a few years.
Drakensberg
Boys Choir School.
Which is where?
In KwaZulu-Natal, in just not far from Winterton,
Yes.
the Central Burg. And so what happened there, the organ there, I was organist, residential organist there. The organ got struck by lightning. And so I felt it was a little bit of a dicey situation because we had to fix the instrument, and there were no parts in the country because it's an old English organ like the one we've got here. So I felt a little bit redundant, So I had to then, go new places.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll just pause there. We'll come back to the rest of your journey. But I want to pick up with you again, Bridget. So we left you at university, and you were starting to perform, doing all kinds of things, but also studying other things. When you graduated from UCT, what happened next? Did you move into performing, or?
Well, I started a postgraduate diploma in performance in flute. I had completed around that time also my licentiate, and I was already teaching part-time privately from my digs in observatory, in flute and recorder, and there was an audition for the orchestra. In those days, Artscape was called KPAB, and we had a full opera and ballet and musicals orchestra then, and there was a job going there. And I had grand plans actually to go and pursue postgraduate study abroad with my icon of the flute at the time, who was a professor in Freiburg called Oriel Nicolai. And Nicolai was just my, like you talk about the organist who you most admired through your lineage of teachers you'd had.
Yes.
It was a similar kind of thing. But there came along this audition. And so I thought, I'll put in an application.
Got the job.
Yeah.
And was it for, principal for extending?
It was co-principal. Co-principal. And I was 22. And I then, after a couple of months there, I actually met my husband, who then became my husband, Petri, who's a violinist. And so we were married in 1993, and so on and so on and so on. So there we go. Then I didn't go abroad to study, and my path was very firmly sort of destined to be here, staying in Cape Town. I did do lots of travels abroad every year in our winter holidays, which is the European summer, and I would attend youth masterclasses, chamber music, ensemble things. So I got, over those 4 or 5 years, I still participated in lots of professional development appropriate to my age and level at the time, and I completed a postgraduate diploma in performance, and I began teaching part-time at UCT as well.
I know from having a few musician friends that making a living can always be a challenge, regardless of how talented or brilliant you are, and that I'll talk about orchestral salaries not being wonderful, and that people have to supplement their performance income with teaching, and both of you very talented performers, but you had to go the teaching route. I'm not saying had to, but pursue the teaching route as well. And I've often thought, because you're a talented musician doesn't necessarily mean you're a good teacher. I know in some fields in life, if you have natural talent, it doesn't always make you a good teacher because you don't understand so much people who have to learn it step by step, for whom it doesn't come so naturally, And I know you both moved into teaching. I'm interested to hear you reflect a little bit about how that's been for you, working with young musicians, if you like, who are struggling along, and yet you've performed at an elite level yourself. Has that been a challenge for you?
Well, I've always taught. I've always taught since I was a student, and I was doing, private sort of part-time student teaching kind of work or tutoring work. And I also did, in the middle of my studies, leave the University of Cape Town, and I did a year at a teachers training college actually. I then went back to UCT and finished my degree, but that year was particularly valuable because it was really focused on school teaching. So I learned a lot in that time, and I love teaching. I think that's kind of really my calling, actually, is as a teacher. It's kind of one of the reasons I wake up in the morning to go and see my students and see how they all are and how they're doing, and to see them also fly the coop at the end of their studies and find their way.
Very rewarding.
Yeah, and I think those of us who do really enjoy teaching, it definitely is a calling, and it is a something about that almost that growth of watching people flourish and find and young people find their feet and find their paths and find their passions and reach their potential. And I'm not only talking about teaching students who are necessarily easy to teach or easier to teach, who already are on some kind of trajectory where they're quite sure about what they want to do and they're pretty good at it. But I'm also talking about those who are finding their way and who are maybe struggling, but who are very determined to do something. And I find all students really, really
something.
It's a very engaging profession for me. Yeah.
Well, I was very lucky in a way, because all the jobs I had in my life also, it was a combo thing. I had to teach, but also I had the opportunity to play, to perform. Like at the Jogsburg Boys Choir, we toured America. I played on the most beautiful organs and instruments and halls. But after that, I was lucky to get a position at the State Theatre in Pretoria downtown, where I worked with people like Hans, the opera director, and Mimi Kutze, and people like that. So I met world-known directors and composers and wonderful. I played so many scores, opera scores from A to Z. So it was a very, very lucky situation for me. I was the pianist, accompanist coach for the incubator scheme of the company. So we toured the countryside and we showed off the beautiful voices we worked with. We did some vignettes, little soirees, and then part of that we also canvassed new voices, new beautiful voices, and then we gave them the opportunity to study theatre and opera and all those things. So that was a wonderful experience for me as well. But because of the fact that it wasn't a profit organization, Lotto stock, we didn't pay out that sort of thing. So I had to work for months without any remuneration. So after 6 months, I said, okay, now, unfortunately, I have to go. So I see myself as a rover, go from one place to the other. So, the life takes you places. And then I ended up in teaching again. Yeah. So teaching was always my back door.
So how did you find yourself in Cape Town, Willem?
At some point, I felt that Cape Town is the centre of the arts. And, there might be people that disagree with me, but I feel Cape Town is the centre of arts for me. So I felt like I would like to be amongst my kind of people. Got a job here at Cura Durbanville, which is a very inclusive school, beautiful school, high standard.
Network of schools, isn't it? There's
yes,
schools.
yeah. This the flagship one. It's the first school of the Cura group. I'm working with fabulous teachers who are also very fine musicians. So
when did you move to Cape Town?
About 6 7 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, so it's relatively recent.
Yes.
To take up the position at Kura.
Yes.
And what's your specific role there?
I'm a piano teacher. Had a few organ students, but then they're far to fetch. So basically, piano and also music as subject from early to matric.
And has Cape Town lived up to its billing as the home?
Oh, absolutely. I met so many people. I always knew Bridget. We had a gig in Somerset West.
Yes, soon after Willem came to Cape Town, we worked together at a winter or summer camp, some kind of school holiday, youth ensemble, tuition masterclass type of ensemble camp or orchestra camp or something like that.
Yes.
And we were both working with the young people there, and that's how we met. And we played together, I think, a bit at that.
Mm-hmm.
We did play in a concert as well.
Yes.
I worked with some of the singers you were accompanying. I know, yes, Willem was accompanying quite a few of the singers. And I think that, Willem, hearing your story about working with singers through the Pretoria State Theatre and all those tours and that program, now I understand why we are so lucky to have such a wonderful accompanist here. Because if you've worked with singers like that as a pianist, you become such a brilliant accompanist because singers...
You're a listener.
You have to listen because singers sing so freely, and pianists who've worked like that with singers really get that. And so that's why having Willem at the organ for us here at RUC, I can understand why it's so lovely and easy to actually sing with him because he is listening to us. So thank you, Willem. I didn't know that part of your story. But anyway, so we had a lovely time meeting at that summer camp. And then I think we then had something after that where I played with you for something or we did...
Yes, but you told me you had a student, and he's the organist here and he might go overseas for, he received a bursary to study overseas and, Willem, we might need an organist.
Well, that's maybe the next part of the story we'd like to talk about is, how you both found your way to RUC. So maybe start with you, Bridget.
Well, it was a dark and stormy day, and yes, it was. It really was, because it was the middle of winter, about 8 years ago, and we had been away for the weekend with friends in Betty's Bay, my husband and I. We got home on that. We'd been away, I think, just for the night even, or for a Friday and a Saturday. And we got home on that Saturday afternoon to find that our house had been broken into. It was raining, it was cold. We arrived home and our front, a couple of our front windows and things, and the door was shattered glass everywhere, various cupboards and things, it was all topsy-turvy, and we had taken our dog with us away for the weekend, and whoever had done this had realised that they could get into the house, alarm and all. So we arrived home to this very traumatic situation and scene, and we were busy dealing with it, and my cell phone rang, and it was Peter Fox. So Peter, thank you for that, because if you're watching, you'll remember the story. Peter said, Bridget, would you like to come and play something at a small service I'm taking tomorrow morning, Sunday morning? And so I could literally hardly speak to Peter at that moment, because we were absolutely in the first 10 minutes of dealing with the trauma of this situation we had just come upon as we got home. And I said to him, Peter, I can't actually really talk, I can't even think straight right now. Can I call you back later? I was in turmoil. I was tearful, I was upset, I was in shock, basically. And as I heard myself saying those words to him, I said, actually, yes, I'll be there tomorrow morning. This is the best thing for me, to have something nice to focus on, something nice to do, and to take my mind off this, and yes, I'll see you tomorrow morning. So he said, all right, Bridget, well, I'll come and fetch you at the appointed time, and we'll get there a bit in time, in time to plan the service and what you're going to play and so on. And so Peter picked me up. It was pelting with rain on that Sunday morning. Absolutely. It was, I think, the biggest cold front, the biggest winter storm of that winter 8 years ago. We arrived here at RUC. Umbrellas were not doing it. Winter coats were not doing it. We almost swam from the car to get in the back door here at the back office of RUC. There were bricks along this back alleyway here so that we could avoid the sort of torrents of water, yes. And we stepped over these bricks like stepping stones and came in here, being careful not to bring too much water in with us as we came in. And we went and huddled around a little heater in the back office, shook our wet clothes off, and we were huddling around this heater, sort of drying ourselves. And there was a lovely lady also sitting on the couch next to the heater called Joan Crummock. And we sat down and we were just chatting, and maybe we had a cup of warm tea or something, and we were talking about what we were going to do in the service. And then Joan said, you know, I grew up in Grahamstown, and my neighbour was B. Rennie. And B. Rennie I know B. Rennie's not alive anymore, but she had a granddaughter who was a flute player in Cape Town. And do you perhaps know her?
There you are.
So, what actually had happened was they had grown up together as childhood friends, and Joan was a bit younger than my granny, and so on and so on. There was even a book. They had written a book, or Joan had written a book. There's a lovely book about Beatrice and I, and Joan wrote the book about her friendship with my granny. So we reminisced, and later on that week I went and visited Joan, and there was this whole wonderful confluence of life events and family. And of course I didn't know Joan, but I'd heard about Joan from my granny when I was younger. And to this day I still remember that dark and stormy day and the very moving service that we had. It was a particularly moving and reflective service in which the flute played a role, playing a very reflective and moving piece. And I'm so grateful that Peter invited me that day. I'm so grateful to have met Joan that day, and subsequently to have gone to the fair meeting and where she was living at the time, and shared some more beautiful nostalgic memories with her, and she told me a bit about growing up with my granny and so on. And so I kind of felt like I'd come into a family here where I didn't really know many people other than Peter Fox. Peter Fox and I he knows our family quite well. We've done wonderful counselling with Peter and worked together and been friends for a long time. So knowing Peter and having met Joan that day, even though I didn't know many people here then, it felt like a new kind of home that I could be part of. So I was really grateful for that, actually. And the whole circumstances around that weekend were just quite it's something you really don't forget. Yes.
Had you come from a church tradition? I mean, were you looking for churches? You know, it's one thing to come and play your flute at a funeral, but it's another thing to actually say, no, I want to make this a church community. I mean, what happened there?
It wasn't a funeral, it was a normal Sunday morning service.
I'm sorry.
No, yeah. But it's a good question. I had grown up in the German Lutheran church at the top of St. Martini Church at the top of Long Street. My mum, through my mum's Lutheran background, we were all christened and confirmed at the German Lutheran church. And I could speak German as a child. I've lost most of it now, and as a young adult I went for a while to the cathedral. This is the Anglican Cathedral in Cape Town. I really loved the music at the Anglican Cathedral, and my brother was a chorister there for quite a long time. So because of that, and enjoying the music in the cathedral, I always found it a very important spiritual space for me. So I sort of became Anglican, kind of. And then I moved a little bit broader, and I was looking for something not quite with so much ritual and dogma. And so I joined the Unitarian Church actually in Cape Town. And I found that in that period of my life, for about 5 years or so, I must have been in my, age sort of 25 to 30, that sort of age, or 25 to 35. That was a very appropriate place for me to be. But one's thinking changes and one grows and I don't know, life for me is searching. We're all searching for meaning and identity and our relationship with life and our spirituality and our religion and our Christian faith. And so I was actually a little bit lost, so to speak. I was looking. I wasn't consciously looking, to answer your question. But I hadn't found anything. So this also was very timeless and was lovely to find RUC at that time.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Willem, for you, I mean, were you part of a church tradition growing up, playing organ at churches? But tell us a bit more about that and how you came to be at RUC.
Well, I was born in a very conservative, Calvinistic type of environment. Usually, I'm Afrikaans, so I used to play in Afrikaans churches mostly, but also a few Anglican services here and there and all that. So, but I always was, church was equal to playing the organ for me because I did it from very early age. So there was just a brief time in the Drakensberg where I wasn't part of the church because of it's in the middle of nowhere, the school there. But when I came to Cape Town, I felt a void. I need to play organ again, So I took a position here at the NG Church, Ronnebos, around the corner. Beautiful.
I think I played with you there.
Yes.
I think that's actually maybe our first musical sharing.
Yes.
It's not exactly around the corner from Durbanville, though.
No, but that was available at the stage, and I loved the people, wonderful people, and a very historic building and a beautiful organ. But one thing bothered me. It's a one manual instrument. Beautiful sound, beautiful people, but something bothered me there. I couldn't play repertoire, proper organ repertoire. So when she introduced me to RUC, she said to me, "Listen, we have a 4-manual organ." I said, "Okay, I'm in." So
I was suitably persuasive.
I'm very glad because I can also confirm what she said. I really found that this congregation is so loving. There's so much love here, so much gratitude towards each other, and it's been a fabulous roller coaster working with musicians, because and also, of course, primarily with Robert, who is also a very fine musician. So he understands us musicians. He understands. He would, if I talk about Bach or Mendelssohn or sonatas or whatever, he exactly understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So we work very well together. I call him a friend, but also a very fine colleague.
So Bridget, obviously you come from a rich performance tradition. You've talked about your teaching, which is a big part of what you do now, but you're also moving into other areas with, musicians, health, mental health, and body works. Perhaps tell us a little bit more about that.
I completed a PhD in 2018, and my focus of my research is all to do with, of that particular research study, was the development of performance health coursework in university level for music students. So what we call it is occupational health curricula, really. So just like athletes, sportsmen have sports medicine, there is a field called performance science or performing arts health, which comprises the all the aspects of the performing artist's health, and that is to prevent occupational related injuries and to promote health and to optimize performance. So here we're talking about 4 areas of health, really, that if you want me to sort of divide it up for you, it's the musculoskeletal things, the repetitive strain and postural related aspects, physical aspects. Then it's also the mental, the psychological, the emotional, all of those kinds of aspects. Then it's also the vocal, so taking care of vocal health, and Willem and I, as music teachers, are also considered what we call professional voice users. Therefore, we also have to take care of our voices because we are using our voices all the time to communicate and sing and so on. But obviously for singers and theatre and drama people, voice is it. And then, of course, the 4th category is hearing health and hearing conservation. So that's another whole field. So there are those 4 areas, the physical, psychological, vocal and hearing related aspects. And as I say, it's all about training people in their occupation related health so that they can prevent injury and understand what to do, because most of these things are preventable. The research shows that 90% of these occupation related health issues are preventable if people just had the training to know what to do. So it's a no-brainer really that the stuff should be included in their training. So that was my PhD, devising a course, teaching the course and researching all of that. My focus now as a postdoctoral researcher and so on is broader. I am working a lot with the performing arts health field more broadly, so projects related to all the performing arts. I'm involved as president of a new South African organisation called the South African Performing Arts Health Association, and I'm also working alongside the education committee of a large advocacy group called I'm for the Arts, and some other theatre and drama groups, for example STAND, which is called Sustaining Theatre and Dance, and TADA, which is Theatre and Dance Association, I think, or Alliance. There are a number of organisations, and actually there's going to be a very interesting arts summit in the middle of September in which we're all putting our heads together to talk about the future of all the arts in South Africa and how we can really boost and talk about these things right from the macro policy aspects right down to the individual practitioner aspects and everything in between. So the whole ecosystem, the funding, the education at all levels, the performance opportunities, the payments, all those kinds of things. I mean, it's pie in the sky kind of stuff I'm talking about, but, you know, those conversations need to be had. So I'm kind of stepping back in a way now in the sort of later part of my career. I'm in my mid-50s, and I'm very keen to look quite broadly at the whole industry and to see how I can kind of pay back and put things into the industry that, based on all my experience in all the areas that I'm involved in, research, teaching and practitioner, and a practitioner across the board, not just in an orchestra, but touring productions, solo work, chamber music, cross-disciplinary projects, commercial work, sound recordings. You know, one realizes at some stage one can actually then help the next generation by trying to bring those things together and to contribute towards forwarding the industry for the future. So that's a passion of mine.
Sure, and I imagine made much more difficult by COVID-19, which, you know, has arguably been, well, undoubtedly been devastating for the arts community. You know,
Indeed.
People can't perform, and I know many musicians are in dire straits. You know,
Exactly.
so
Exactly, you've hit the nail on the head. So it's particularly pertinent now, particularly the financial and livelihood and economic aspects, as well as the mental health aspects.
yes.
So through Sapaha, we are really one of our focus points in our current strategy as soon as we launch with our NGO and PBO numbers and so on, which we should get any day now, is to be able to start some subsidised counselling services and things like that to support artists.
I've often thought with musicians, often what makes someone a wonderful musician is, depth of passion and emotional expressivity, but that can also be, depressives, and, you meet some musicians who are very talented but have very dark personal lives, very, up and down, so this whole mental health thing must be huge for musicians as well, when it's often a very insecure living financially,
In order to be an expressive creative, you have to touch a part of the vulnerable part of yourself.
Yes.
If you don't go there, you can't really be in touch with communicating those emotions.
Yeah.
And so the danger is then, how do you balance out your life with dealing with a very creative, expressive, communicative field of work, but at the same time knowing how to kind of debrief and
But just deal with the
stay
very
balanced.
business of life.
Yes,
It's often different
yes.
skill sets or
Yes, absolutely.
disciplines.
Yes.
Sure. Okay.
Fascinating. Field. Fascinating field you're in. She actually worked on me. Can you remember that, Bridget?
A little bit, yes, actually. I hope it was useful.
It was.
Can I ask, just maybe to reflect back, maybe you will think of one highlight from your performance, career, as when you think of a moment where it was just absolutely wonderful playing. Maybe start with you, Willem. Can you think of?
Oh, there's so many. I believe one of the greatest moments was when I played at the World Choir Games a few years ago with a choir, local choir. It was absolutely wonderful to play in the Muziekverein in Vienna. So I was on that stage.
Very famous, the Vienna Phil and the
Yes.
New Eve.
Yeah.
So that's a great moment for me. So yes.
And Bridget?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is actually quite a bizarre one, but I think because it was so different, it was so moving for me. I was playing penny whistle in an arrangement of a beautiful song by Lisa Bierkman, a South African singer and artist and songwriter. And this was set to music and arranged by a fantastic music director and arranger and longtime colleague and close friend, Janine Willem. And this was at a big production in the Sun City Super Bowl at Sun City.
Wow.
And it was called Skouspel. Now, Skouspel, don't laugh, Willem. Skouspel is, or was, it doesn't exist quite in the same form anymore. There are other productions that mimic the same sort of thrust of that particular show. It was a production that ran for many, many years, about 15 years, once a year, in sort of September, October, at the Sun City Super Bowl, where audiences would come from all over the country for 2 full weekends of the entire Super Bowl packed for about 6 or 7 performances. And bear in mind that place seats about 6,000 or 7,000 people. I think they would have about 6,000 people. And the musicians would be brought in. Those were the days of better funding for productions in the arts and better economic situation in South Africa. And so we were brought in to do the production, musicians from around South Africa. And there was an orchestra, rhythm section, fantastic vocalists, a big production. So it was like a 3-hour show. And we did all kinds of different stuff in the small orchestra. Classical things with opera singers, rock, pop, crossover kind of songs and choral stuff and stuff with dancers and a lot of popular Afrikaans singers. Fantastic, many of them. And wonderful experiences we had over the years at Skouspel. And this particular event, this particular one, I was not sitting within the orchestral group, but I was mic'd up to go and stand up in front and play this very haunting penny whistle, sort of interwoven solo in amongst the vocal of Lisa Bierkman singing. And to this day, that still is one of the most spine-chilling musical experiences for me. It was unusual for me to be playing penny whistle. It was a very moving piece, a very moving arrangement of the piece, and a very powerful situation to be in. It was kind of at one moment intimate, and at the same time, so many people.
Yeah.
And when the spotlight is on you, but you know there's so many people, you can't see them. And you're in this enormous space, but when you're totally taken into the music, you're nervous, yes, you're very nervous, but at that moment your nerves go away, and you're in this trance-like space for a moment. It's all rehearsed and well ready to go. And that's one of those times I've had that kind of experience. I suppose you would call it a flow experience.
Zone or something.
Yeah, a flow experience. Another interesting one I've had was at playing at RUC in the Bush in the Northern Kruger Park. I've done that gig a couple of times. It's a wonderful gig with another icon of the South African music world, Richard Koch. And he's asked me to be involved in that a few times, and I've performed there as part of RUC in the Bush, far up in the Northern Kruger Park. It's an epic adventure of a gig for any musician to do. We all love being there, and it's hot. We're in a boma, there are elephants and all kinds of things nearby, and we are playing this incredible music also with wonderful colleagues. And so a number of those experiences also really stand out for me.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Just want to ask maybe a more challenging question to both of you. I mean, we live in a context in South Africa with huge, economic inequity, and as you perform music at an elite level in a lot of instances, how does that relate to the average South African who comes from a very different background, maybe a very different musical tradition? Do those worlds intersect for you? And in your teaching, are you able to feel that you're part of maybe transforming the country and bringing about change for people who come from very different backgrounds, and for whom Mendelssohn and Bach aren't exactly the composers they have on the tip of their tongues?
Well, as a South African, you need to be very, very versatile. As a South African musician, I work with so many people. I really don't see colour of skin when I teach people and when I play with people. I work with so many opera singers. They're usually people of colour, but I don't see that. We have a collective outcome. We need to make beautiful music. So
is there a changing demographic? Are you finding that there's greater participation in the arts?
Is it changing? I think so. It's much more.
Also, what we're doing at university level is gradually quite a lot of curriculum change. So, in fact, where I work at Stellenbosch, we are very busy with curriculum renewal plans, and well aware of the post-colonial or decolonial or the changing needs of the curriculum, in the sense that the skill sets required now for people in the performing arts, as Willem said, need to be broader. We look a lot more at concepts of employability, concepts of inclusivity, diversity, equity in the curriculum, and there's a lot of really good work being done in that area. The fruit of that work, I think, is only going to show later. So that's on a sort of a institutional and curriculum perspective, looking at how those curricula are changing. And that change is happening all through the board, in junior schools, high schools, and in universities, that there is a big change in subjects on offer, instruments on offer, the genres on offer, the type of training that's offered, the way the coursework is structured to be focused not only on Bach and Mendelssohn, but using a foundation, for example, of notational reading abilities and so on, so that somebody can read and understand across the board stylistically and genre-wise. So it's not to say that our basic skill sets like theory of music and reading Western notation are going to be chucked out, but it's to say that we need both and. So we also need the oral music traditions, and we need to get better at teaching those. We need to also get much better at participatory music traditions, and we need to be better at, we already have those in our music programs, but we need to be better at teaching those. So I'm very aware of confronting myself and looking at how I teach and interrogating how I can bring more of those kinds of approaches into my teaching, even though I play a Western classical instrument. And to help my students be, my current students already, who are still in that sort of more traditional program of a Western art music B-minus degree, to be more open-minded and adaptable. But definitely the curricula are changing big time at the moment. So we're going to see a lot of change. Within the next 10 years, I think the way that we teach a Bachelor of Music degree or diploma is the evaluation criteria are going to be different, the subjects are going to be broader and more inclusive, and so on and so on. And you're quite right, it's a very important area, not even only in South Africa. The diversity, equity and inclusion and post-colonial aspects are happening everywhere. I've got some colleagues in the States, in Europe, and we're pretty much all working on the same kinds of curriculum changes at the moment, particularly in the conservatory settings where your traditional music conservatoires have been focused on teaching from a Western art music perspective.
In the schools also, I'm speaking about the IEB, the IEB school. There's a lot of focus on African music and African township jazz and that sort of thing. So it's very positive. There's a lot of transformation going on.
And it changes the way that you also evaluate your music lessons, your music exams, all those kinds of things. Because when you're looking at things in participatory music making styles and genres and approaches, the ethos is wonderful because it's about the participation and it's about the shared music. Yes, it's not about the Western art music concept of audience and performer. So those things are filtering through a lot, and I can see even there's been a big change in the last 5 years already, even though many curricula haven't formally changed yet. But the ethos and the way we all work is definitely already changing a lot.
We're just about out of time. It'd be nice just to hear a little bit from both of you about who you are when you're not being musicians, you know. We've talked a lot about that. I mean, Bridget, you're a wife and a mother, 3 children. 3 children. And you know, how do you juggle that and other interests, passions in life?
I love my garden. It's early springtime, late winter, so I've just planted my veggie garden. That gives me great joy. And my jasmine, the scent, now when I get home and I walk in and I have that lovely scent of we've got a very small garden, but that brings me great joy, even though it's a little garden. Little things like my jasmine and my lemons on my lemon tree, those little things in life give me really great joy. I like getting my hands dirty in the soil. My children, Nicholas is 27, Paul is 25, and no, he's nearly 25, he's 24. And Mia is 19. I have one daughter, who's the youngest of the 3. And yes, just all wonderful in their own way. Yes, of course, life has its ups and downs, and parenting is tough. Let's not be too sort of idealistic about that. But the joy is immense, and I wouldn't want it any other way. Yeah, and some of you here at RUC do know my daughter Mia, because she was a member here and did her confirmation here and so on. She's now at Stellenbosch University and pretty much living in Stellenbosch as a student. She occasionally pops home and sees us. My 2 sons are also finished their studies. The eldest one has a job. He's working for an environmental consulting company, environmental impact and research. He's a oceanography graduate, a master's, MSc oceanography. He's very interested in environmental sciences and, sustainability and research and so on in that area. So he was looking for a job for 1.5 years, and thank goodness, about a month ago, he actually got a really wonderful job in a superb environmental impact company, so he's working there. And my other son has recently finished a degree in audio technology and production. He's a musician in electronic music. So psytrance and modern electronic music. Extremely brilliant young man. Quite a shy guy. Likes to do his own thing. He's also now at that stage in between studies and looking for work and figuring out what he's going to do with his life. Not an easy time, especially during COVID. So that hasn't been easy for him, and we'll see where that's going. But he's extremely talented and extremely dedicated to that area of work that he absolutely loves. Really good tech guy with music, basically.
Cool.
And then my daughter is studying visual arts at Stellenbosch University. My husband's a violinist, and we met through the orchestra, and he's actually running a very important business in Cape Town for musicians. He's a woodwind instrument repairer, a woodwind instrument
that's good to
technician,
know.
and he specialises in flutes, but he's really in demand. It's called the Flute Workshop. And that's my husband's business. So he's a violinist and still does a bit of freelance playing, but he decided about 10 years ago that it was time to run his own business and stop his orchestral playing. And that is what his business is called, the Flute Practice. So some people say, but he's a violinist, why is he fixing flutes? And well, he's just a brilliant Mr. Fix-It. He's our go-to, and I'm lucky to have a husband who can be so handy and technical.
Something that you don't know, I also played the oboe
I think you did tell me, actually.
for quite a while, so I can maybe use Petri for fixing my instrument. And also I ventured into something that I love more and more each time when I'm with the instrument is the accordion.
Yes, we've seen you play.
I'm taking lessons with Stanislav Angelov.
Wonderful.
So that becomes a passion for me. But I have other little passions as well. And the first one being stamp collector. But I don't have enough time for that. But it's waiting for me there.
I've inherited some stamps from through my family. Can I?
Yeah, pass it on.
Can't touch stamp collector.
Yes, and also I love baking. I would like to have more time for that as well.
I sampled one of your magnificent milk tarts for them, so
it's time for another. And also, I'm not very fond of physical exercise because we musicians, I don't know, but I kind of like to cycle around here in town. I love my spot there at Coburg, but it's closed now for a few months. So I'm hoping soon I would be able to go there again. And that's about it. But most of my day is taken up by teaching, and that's also a passion.
Teachers work hard, I have to say, and after a long day of teaching, you are pretty drained.
Yeah.
People say to me, do you listen to music in the evening? I say, well, actually most evenings no. I love music, but actually, usually I'm just orally too tired. I can't, I don't know how you find it, but it's like your hearing load for the day has been exhausted, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Bridget and Willem. It's been wonderful to chat this morning, get to know you a bit better, and I think we're going to close out with an example of you playing together, so people can not only get to know you as people, but hear you as musicians. So
enjoy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Russell,
Thank you for having us.
And also for this whole series you've been doing, chatting to
wonderful
members of the congregation. It's been lovely to hear from everybody in that way.
Everybody's got a story to tell.
Exactly.
Stories are so important.
Yes.
That's how we get to know each other.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, this is going to be it. This is going to be it.
Okay.
Let's do it. Come on.
My Terra's dynamics was better now.
I'm rolling.
I like it when Elliot plays, so it's fun.
Cool. When you guys ready?